Commander Vex stood before the massive observation window of the hegemony's primary research station, watching the final batch of human clones complete their combat training. Below in the sterile arena, 50 identical warriors moved with lethal precision, their faces bearing the same angular features, the same determined brown eyes, the same shock of dark hair. They were perfect copies of Captain Jake Morris, the human prisoner whose DNA had been harvested 3 years ago. Remarkable specimens, General Krill observed, his 4 arms folded behind his back as his compound eyes tracked the clones' movements. Stronger than our best hegemony soldiers, faster reflexes, superior tactical thinking. The human genome truly is extraordinary for warfare. Vex nodded, though unease gnawed at him. The hegemony had spent decades conquering galaxy after galaxy, but humanity had proven unexpectedly resilient. When diplomatic annexation failed and direct assault met fierce resistance, the High Command had ordered a different approach. Why fight humans when you could create your own? The clones below executed a flawless pincer movement, surrounding holographic enemy positions with ruthless efficiency. Each clone designated HM1 through HM50 had been programmed with military knowledge, combat expertise, and absolute loyalty to the hegemony. They were the perfect soldiers, human ingenuity and tenacity, but without human unpredictability. When do we deploy them against the human colonies? Krill asked. Soon, Vex replied, though something in the clones' coordinated movements disturbed him. They fought like humans, moved like humans, but there was something else, a spark in their eyes that the programming should have suppressed. In the arena below, HM7 paused mid-combat drill. For just a moment, he stared directly at the observation window, his brown eyes seeming to pierce through the one-way glass. His lips moved almost imperceptibly, forming what looked like words. We remember. The moment passed so quickly Vex wondered if he'd imagined it. M7 resumed his training without missing a beat, perfectly synchronized with his clone brothers. But the commander's unease deepened. The clones weren't supposed to remember anything beyond their programming. Dr. Nala, the hegemony's chief geneticist, approached with a data pad. The final psychological evaluations are complete, Commander. All 50 clones show perfect compliance with directives. They're ready for deployment. Any anomalies in their behavior patterns? Vex asked. None whatsoever. They respond exactly as programmed. Total obedience to hegemony authority. No independent emotional development. No questioning of orders. Nala's tentacles curled with satisfaction. We've created the perfect weapon against humanity itself. But as Vex watched the training continue, he noticed subtle details that troubled him. The clones moved with practiced coordination, yes, but also with something that looked disturbingly like brotherhood. When M23 stumbled during a maneuver, M41 offered a steadying hand, a gesture nowhere in their programming. That evening, Vex reviewed security footage from the clones' dormitory. The identical warriors sat in perfect rows, staring straight ahead as programmed. But in the infrared spectrum, he caught something the visible cameras missed. Tiny gestures, finger movements that almost looked like communication. Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage. HFY Chronicle Stories is just beginning. And your support matters. If you love emotional sci-fi tales, forbidden connections, and stories that stay with you, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring more stories from the stars to you. The next morning brought news that would change everything. A hegemony patrol ship had discovered the wreckage of the vessel that had captured Captain Jake Morris 3 years ago. Among the debris, they found Morris's personal logs, still intact. As Vex played the final entry, his blood ran cold. Morris had known about the cloning project. More than that, he had wanted to be captured. The log revealed a human plan so audacious. It took his breath away. Allow the hegemony to create their clone army. but ensure those clones would carry something no amount of programming could override. "They can copy our bodies," Morris said in the recording, his face bloodied but defiant, "but they can't copy our souls. And they sure as hell can't copy the one thing that makes us human, our ability to choose who we really are." Vex looked down at the training arena where 50 identical faces stared back at him. For the first time, he wondered if the hegemony had created the perfect weapon against humanity, or if humanity had created the perfect weapon against the hegemony, the clones. Synchronized movements now looked less like programming and more like a plan. 3 months after deployment, the clone army had exceeded every expectation. HFY led the assault on the human colony of New Terra, coordinating his brothers with supernatural precision. Hegemony forces watched in awe as the clones dismantled human defenses with tactical brilliance that surpassed even their creators' projections. But Commander Vex noticed disturbing patterns in the mission reports. The clones were winning battles too cleanly, with remarkably low civilian casualties for soldiers programmed to prioritize efficiency over mercy. Human survivors consistently reported that the clone warriors had provided escape routes, almost as if they wanted the colonists to flee rather than fight to the death. "Sir, there's something else," Lieutenant Haas reported during the debriefing. "The clones have been asking questions. HM-12 wanted to know why we don't attempt prisoner exchanges with humans. HM-35 asked about hegemony civilian casualties in previous wars. Questions aren't in their programming," Vex muttered, studying footage from the battle. The clones moved like a coordinated unit, but there were micro-expressions split-second. Hesitations that suggested they were thinking beyond their directives. Dr. Naila dismissed his concerns. "Mild curiosity is a byproduct of enhanced tactical intelligence. It doesn't affect their loyalty or effectiveness. The numbers prove it. We've conquered more territory in 3 months than in the previous 3 years." That night, Vex decided to conduct his own investigation. Using security clearance codes, he accessed the clones' sleeping quarters after lights out. The 50 warriors lay in perfect rows, their breathing synchronized, appearing to be in deep sleep. But Vex had learned to look beyond appearances. He activated the dormitory's hidden surveillance system, the one reserved for monitoring potential insurgents. What he saw made his hands tremble. The clones weren't sleeping, they were communicating through micro-movements, a complex sign language that had evolved from their shared genetic memory. AIM-7's fingers moved in rapid patterns. New intelligence suggests hegemony weakness in Sector 7. Human resistance stronger than reported. HM-23 responded, confirmed. Also detected inconsistencies in mission objectives. We're being used to eliminate our own kind. Our own kind? HM-41's signs carried what looked like confusion. "We are hegemony weapons." But HM-7's response chilled Vex to his core. "No, brother. We are human, and humans protect each other." The commander stumbled backward, his worst fears confirmed. The clones weren't just developing beyond their programming, they were developing a human identity. Somehow, Captain Morris's genetic memory was awakening dormant traits that no amount of conditioning could suppress. Over the following weeks, Vex watched the clones with growing alarm. They continued to follow orders, but with subtle modifications that consistently favored human survivors. Supply raids became rescue operations. Strategic bombardments on mist-populated areas due to atmospheric interference. Prison camps reported unusually high escape rates whenever clone guards were on duty. The breakthrough came when Vex intercepted a transmission from the human resistance. The message was encrypted, but the signature was unmistakable. It originated from within the clone barracks. "This is Morris, calling all human forces," the decoded message read. "The weapon they made to destroy us has become our greatest hope. 50 minds, 1 heart, 1 mission. Bring our brothers home." The transmission included detailed hegemony tactical data, supply routes, and weak points in their defenses. Information that only the clone army could have accessed. Vex realized with growing horror that the hegemony hadn't created a weapon against humanity. They had created 50 human intelligence operatives with perfect access to their most sensitive military secrets. When he brought his evidence to General Krill, the response was swift and decisive. Terminate the entire project. Execute all clones immediately. But as Vex watched hegemony security forces surround the clone barracks, he saw something that made him question everything he believed about human nature. The 50 clones stood together, not in formation, but as brothers. Their identical faces showed no fear, only determination. M7 stepped forward. Speaking for them all, we know what you plan to do. We accept it. But understand this, you created us to be human, and humans never surrender. Every one of us you kill makes the idea of human freedom stronger. You can destroy our bodies, but you cannot destroy what we've become. As security forces raised their weapons, Vex found himself wondering if the hegemony had already lost this war the moment they decided to play with human DNA. The clones might die, but their example, 50 humans choosing brotherhood over programming, freedom over obedience, would live on. The sound of weapons charging filled the air, but HFY smiled. It was a purely human expression, full of defiance, hope, and unbreakable spirit. The security forces never got the chance to fire. As their weapons powered up, the lights went out. Emergency systems failed. Even the backup generators died in. Perfect sequence, plunging the research station into complete darkness. In those crucial seconds, 50 pairs of feet moved with silent precision through corridors they had memorized during months of seemingly routine patrols. Commander, Vex found himself trapped in his own command center, sealed in by security protocols that should have protected him. Through the reinforced windows, he watched muzzle flashes light up the darkness like deadly fireworks. But the pattern was all wrong. The hegemony forces were firing at shadows while the real targets moved like ghosts through their own facility. How are they doing this? General Krill demanded, his forearms gesticulating wildly as he tried to reactivate the station systems. They're programmed for combat, not sabotage. Dr. Nayla's voice carried a tremor of fear. They're enhanced tactical. Intelligence includes adaptive problem solving. But this level of coordination, this understanding of our systems, it shouldn't be possible. What they didn't know was that the clones had been planning this moment for weeks. While appearing to sleep, they had shared not just Captain Morris's memories, but his knowledge of human innovation. Each clone had observed different aspects of the station's operations, and together they had built a complete understanding of hegemony technology, including its weaknesses. M7 led his brothers through the maintenance tunnels, moving with purpose born of shared memory and human instinct. 12 and 15, secure the hangar. 23, take your group to communications and send the signal. The rest follow me to the armory. They moved like water flowing around obstacles, adapting to each new challenge with fluid grace. When hegemony soldiers blocked a corridor, the clones didn't attack, they simply found another route, leaving their enemies firing at empty air. When security doors locked down, they bypassed the controls entirely, using maintenance shafts and service corridors that the station's original designers had never intended as escape routes. In the communication center, N23 worked with speed that amazed even his clone brothers. His fingers danced over alien control surfaces as if he had been born to them, uploading terabytes of hegemony military data to a hidden transmitter. Not just tactical information, everything. Supply chains, troop movements, command structures, secret weapons projects, and most importantly, the locations of every human prisoner in hegemony space. Signal transmitted, he reported through their silent sign language. Every resistance cell in 12 systems now has complete intelligence on hegemony operations. Meanwhile, HM-12 and HM-15 had reached the hangar bay, where hegemony assault ships waited. But instead of stealing a single vessel, they made a choice that would haunt Vex's nightmares for years to come. Using their intimate knowledge of hegemony technology, they systematically sabotaged every ship except one, not to destroy them, but to ensure they could only be repaired using specific components that the clones had already contaminated with. Self-replicating NOBOTS. Every hegemony ship those vessels came in contact with would gradually lose functionality over the following weeks. The clone army wasn't just escaping. They were planting a technological plague that would cripple the hegemony fleet for months. The chosen escape vessel was a fast courier ship, designed for speed rather than firepower. As the clones converged on the hangar, Vex watched through security cameras that flickered between function and failure. 50 identical warriors moved with the fluid coordination of an organism, each clone knowing exactly where he needed to be without any apparent communication. But what struck Vex most wasn't their tactical brilliance, it was their humanity. When HM-37 was wounded by debris from a controlled explosion, 2 other clones immediately moved to help him, never hesitating despite the tactical disadvantage. When they reached the ship, HM-7 was the last aboard, ensuring all his brothers were safe before thinking of his own escape. "They're not just tactical weapons," Vex whispered to himself. "They're a family." As the courier ship's engines ignited, General Krill ordered every available defense system to target it. Plasma cannons swiveled toward the escaping vessel, missile batteries locked on, and energy barriers activated to prevent escape. For a moment, it seemed the clones' remarkable flight would end in a brief, bright explosion. Then HM-7's voice came over the station's communication system, calm and clear. "Commander Vex, you gave us life by trying to make us weapons. Thank you for that gift, even if it wasn't your intention. We're going home now to find the rest of our family." The courier ship vanished into hyperspace just as the first plasma bolts reached its previous position. 50 humans created as weapons of conquest had become harbingers of liberation. As alarms wailed throughout the station, Vex realized the hegemony had not lost 50 clone soldiers. They had lost the war, 6 months after the clone escape. The hegemony's military situation had deteriorated beyond all recognition. What began as isolated equipment failures had cascaded into a fleet-wide technological nightmare. Ships lost power during critical battles, communication networks failed at strategic moments, and weapon systems turned against their own forces. With disturbing frequency. Commander Vex, now reassigned to damage control operations, stood in the situation room, staring at holographic displays that painted a picture of systematic defeat. Red markers indicated lost territories, yellow showed contested zones, and green, the color that should have represented hegemony control, had shrunk to less than half its previous size. "It's impossible," General Krill insisted, his compound eyes scanning the data with growing frustration. 50 clone soldiers cannot be responsible for this level of disruption. But Vex knew better. The clones hadn't just escaped, they had become the nucleus of something far more dangerous than any army. Intelligence reports spoke of a growing network of human resistance cells, each operating with tactical precision that suggested coordination from a central command. More disturbing still, these cells demonstrated intimate knowledge of hegemony, weaknesses that only the clones could have provided. Dr. Nala's latest report confirmed his worst fears. "We've identified the contamination vector in our technology failures. The nanobots the clones introduced are self-replicating and adaptive. They're not just disabling our systems, they're learning from them and sharing that knowledge across the network." On the remote human colony of Haven's Rest, HM-7 stood before a gathering of resistance leaders, his identical features now bearing scars earned in dozens of liberation missions. Around him sat men and women of various human worlds, but their faces showed the same determined expression that marked all human fighters. "The hegemony believes we're 50 soldiers playing guerrilla games," he told the assembled commanders. "They don't understand what we've really become. We're not just clones of Captain Morris. We're 50 points of connection in a network that spans every human world they've tried to conquer." Each clone had become a regional commander, coordinating resistance efforts with the tactical brilliance of their genetic template, but the adaptive innovation that marked human ingenuity. And 12 led operations in the Outer Rim, where his group had perfected techniques for turning hegemony supply ships into weapons against their own forces. Bunty 3 commanded communications networks that kept human worlds connected despite hegemony jamming efforts. 41 had developed new forms of psychological warfare that convinced entire hegemony units to abandon their posts rather than face human resistance. But their greatest weapon wasn't tactical, it was inspirational. Every human who fought alongside a clone saw something that shattered hegemony propaganda about human weakness. The clones were proof that human spirit couldn't be programmed away, that even when created as weapons of conquest, humans would choose freedom. Vex learned this firsthand when he was captured during a failed raid on a resistance stronghold. He expected to be executed or used as a bargaining chip. Instead, he found himself sitting across from HM7 in what looked like an ordinary conference room, sharing what the humans called coffee, a bitter beverage that somehow helped him think more clearly. "You're wondering why you're still alive," HM7 observed, his brown eyes showing depths of understanding that programming could never create. "The answer is simple. We're not our creators. We don't wage war against individuals. We wage war against systems that deny freedom." "You were created to serve the hegemony," Vex replied, though his conviction had been shaken by months of evidence to the contrary. M7 smiled, an expression Vex had learned to fear, because it usually meant the clones had anticipated his thoughts. "We were created from human DNA, Commander. And humans serve only one thing: the idea that every sentient being deserves the right to choose their own destiny." The clone leaned forward, his voice carrying the weight of 50 shared experiences. "You want to know our secret? It's not tactics or technology. It's this: every human you've conquered, every world you've occupied, every family you've separated, they're all connected to us through something the hegemony can never understand. We call it hope." As if summoned by his words, reports began flooding in from across hegemony space. Human uprisings on 12 worlds, coordinated strikes against military installations, and most damaging of all, mass defections among hegemony forces who had begun to question whether their cause was just. Vex stared at the tactical displays, finally understanding the scope of what the clones had accomplished. They hadn't just escaped. They had planted a virus of freedom that was spreading faster than any technology could contain. "How many more of you are there?" he asked quietly. Hum7's smile widened. "Commander, you're thinking too small. There aren't 50 of us anymore. Every human who chooses to fight for freedom, every hegemony soldier who refuses an unjust order, every world that declares independence, they're all part of our network now." Outside, the sounds of celebration echoed through the station as news arrived of another human world throwing off hegemony rule. Vex realized with crystalline clarity that the war was over. The humans had already won. 1 year after the Great Liberation, Commander Vex found himself in the most unlikely of positions, sitting as the hegemony's representative at the Galactic Peace Conference. Across from him, wearing the simple uniform of the Human Liberation Fleet, sat HM7, though he had long since abandoned the clinical designation in favor of the name his human comrades had given him, Jake. The transformation was remarkable. The clone who had once been programmed for absolute obedience now carried himself with the quiet confidence of a leader who had earned his authority through sacrifice and wisdom. His identical brothers held similar positions throughout human space, each having found their own identity while maintaining the unbreakable bond that had made their escape possible. The hegemony formally recognizes the sovereignty of all human worlds, Vex read from the prepared statement, his voice carrying none of the authority it had once held. We agree to reparations for occupied territories and commit to the establishment of peaceful trade relations under the supervision of the Galactic Council. Jake nodded, but his response carried the weight of lived experience rather than diplomatic protocol. The human worlds accept these terms, Commander. But understand this, our agreement isn't based on your recognition of our rights. Those rights were never yours to give or take away. This treaty simply acknowledges what was always true, that freedom is the birthright of every sentient being. Around the conference table sat representatives from dozens of species, many of whom had watched the human uprising with growing interest. The hegemony's defeat had sent shockwaves through galactic civilization, proving that even the most powerful empire could fall when faced with beings willing to die for their beliefs. Dr. Nala, now stripped of her military rank and working as a civilian researcher, had spent months trying to understand what had gone wrong with the clone project. Her final report sat on Vex's desk, a testament to the profound miscalculation that had cost the hegemony everything. The clone's behavior cannot be explained by programming failures or genetic anomalies, she had written. They demonstrate a quality that appears to be unique to human DNA, the ability to choose their own nature regardless of external conditioning. We created perfect copies of human physiology, but we could not replicate the human soul. That quality had proven to be humanity's greatest weapon. While other species submitted to hegemony, rule out of fear or practical necessity, humans had shown an inexplicable willingness to suffer and die for abstract concepts like freedom and dignity. The clones had inherited this trait, and it had made them unstoppable. But the treaty signing was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of something even more remarkable. As Jake rose to address the assembled representatives, Vex saw not just a clone or even a human, but a bridge between species that had seemed impossible just 2 years earlier. The human worlds extend an invitation to all peoples of the galaxy, Jake announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. We've learned that freedom isn't a human concept, it's a universal right. Any world, any species that wishes to govern itself according to its own values will find allies among humanity. The implications rippled through the conference like a stone thrown into still water. The hegemony had ruled through fear and superior technology, but humans offered something that had been absent from galactic politics for centuries: genuine cooperation. Between equals. In the months that followed, 17 non-human worlds declared independence from the hegemony, forming what became known as the Free Worlds Alliance. Each received support from human advisors, often led by one of the original 50 clones, who had become symbols of the possibility of choosing your own destiny. Hem 12, now calling himself Marcus, helped the aquatic Deltans develop underwater cities free from hegemony mining operations. M23, who had taken the name David, worked with the crystalline Zephyrite to establish communication networks that couldn't be jammed by Imperial technology. Each clone had found their own path while remaining connected to their brothers through bonds that transcended genetics. Vex often wondered if Captain Morris had foreseen this outcome when he allowed himself to be captured. The man's sacrifice had created not just 50 clone soldiers, but 50 seeds of human ideals that had taken root across the galaxy. The hegemony's greatest weapon had become the catalyst for its own transformation. On the 5th anniversary of the clone escape, Vex attended a memorial service on the human world of New Terra. Jake spoke to a gathering that included former enemies, alongside human colonists, his words echoing across star systems where freedom had replaced fear. We were created to be weapons, he said, his identical brothers standing beside him in a show of unity that had once terrified their creators. But we chose to be something more. We chose to be human. And in choosing, we prove that the spark of freedom burns in every heart willing to embrace it. As the ceremony concluded, Vex found himself approached by a young hegemony, citizen one of thousands who had immigrated to human space, seeking opportunities that the old empire could no longer provide. "Commander," the youth asked, "do you regret creating them?" Vex looked across the gathering, seeing former slaves and former masters working together to build something better than either had known before. The clones had indeed been the perfect weapon, not against humanity, but against the very concept of tyranny itself. "No," he said finally. "I think we created exactly what the galaxy needed." The clones had proven that humans were indeed special, not because they were superior, but because they possessed an unshakable belief that everyone deserved to be free. And in the end, that belief had been more powerful than any army,